Hello again, and welcome to the OR Sports High School Football Wrap-Up Show. I am Sports Editor Chris Dugan.
And I'm Assistant Sports Editor Joe Tuscano, and today we're going to talk about playoff possibilities. And unbelievably, with our teams in our area, there's only one.
There's only one team that can play in the final week of the regular season, which is Friday night, and play its way into the playoffs without any help from any other team. We'll let you know in a little bit who that team is. But we're going to talk a little bit about teams that have clinched playoff bids already. Last week we went into Friday night with 7 teams in. In 4A we had Belle Vernon and South Fayette. In AA, Washington, Burgettstown, and Chartiers Houston had clinched playoff berths. And in Class A, out of the Tri-County South, Carmichael's and Fort Cherry were in. Joe, we had 4 teams last week that added to that total. We now have 11 in the playoffs. Among the 4 was Ringgold, and that's where we are this week at Joe Montana Stadium on the campus of Ringgold High School. You'll hear from Nick Milchovich, the head coach at Ringgold, in a few moments. But first, Joe, let's talk about how Ringgold got into the playoffs. They didn't even have to play a conference game to get into the playoffs last week. They won when Trinity lost 27-0 to Greensburg-Salem. That gave Ringgold automatically the 4th spot in the Big 9 conference.
But that didn't stop them from breaking my heart as they beat my alma mater, Newcastle.
It's been a rough year for Newcastle against the local teams. They lost to South Fayette also.
They lost a big lead to Aliquippa in the first game of the season too, and everybody thought, oh, they're going to upset the Quips, and they came back and beat Newcastle. I believe they scored the last 40 points of the game.
Now, Ringgold put up a lot of points. They win 41-27 at Newcastle. That was an impressive performance. Brendan Small, the running back, he's back in the lineup, 168 yards and 4 touchdowns for the Rams. George Martin, the quarterback, had another big game. He was 11 of 21, 234 yards and a touchdown in that game. Rams get in, even though it's a non-conference game, they get into the playoffs when Trinity loses. And that was a surprise to me, Joe. I had picked Trinity to win. Greensburg-Salem came into that game having given up an average of 34 points a game defensively, and they get a shutout over Trinity.
Yeah, Trinity a head scratcher for me too. I mean, they don't score. Joey Caroli, they're all do everything running back. Had a decent game, but doesn't get into the end zone. They're hard to figure, and this loss really, it was devastating because it knocked them out of the playoffs. They would have been playing Ringgold for the last spot in the conference.
That's right. Ringgold plays here, hosting Trinity on Friday night, and now that game does not have a bearing on the standings. Now, another team that got into the playoffs, that's in AA. Beth-Center gets in. They've clinched at least the 5th spot in the Century Conference. They won 20-0 over Charleroi, and they had to wait an extra day to get into the playoffs. That game was moved from Friday to Saturday because of the rain and the bad weather Friday night. They have a grass field at Beth-Center, so they backed that up one day. Bulldogs win, and they're in the playoffs.
Yeah, and what a week for Beth-Center. Not only did they have to wait an extra day, but earlier in the week they found out that one of their players, Johnny Little, is ill and in the hospital, and is not going to be playing for the remainder of the season. And that kind of stuff, the emotional upheaval on that Saturday and Sunday when the news spread through the team, and they gathered themselves and were ready to play. There was senior night on Friday, and then they had to have that game pushed back because of the rain. There was a lot of reasons for them not to play well, but they didn't. They gathered themselves, they got a big win for them, and just my hat's off to the stamina and the heart that they showed.
2 other teams that got into the playoffs came from the Tri-County South. California is short of the 3rd place spot in the Tri-County South. California wins 45-2 over Jefferson Morgan. There were a few games with safeties last week. I think the weather had a lot to do with that. The other team that got in didn't even play a conference game, didn't even win, didn't even score. Mapletown lost 48-0 to Jeanette. That's undefeated Jeanette. That was a non-conference game, but because Avella knocked off Monessen, that assured Mapletown of finishing 4th in the Tri-County South, and they get one of the playoff spots.
Yeah, and when the PIAA went to 6 classifications, I'm not sure that they thought this was the great scenario that they were going to have, but you have some teams that have been, got in because what other teams did, and not necessarily what they did in the 9th week. And of course, coaches aren't going to bicker with that. They want to get in any way they possibly can.
And a lot of teams get in A and Double A. 16 teams in those playoff brackets. Double A, you play the entire season to eliminate 8 teams.
Yeah, I don't really think I like the fact that they have it like this.
It creates a crazy scenario like we're gonna talk about with the Tri-County South in a few moments, where you have some teams with really odd records that could get into the playoffs.
And with very few wins in the conference.
Now, there were 3 teams locally that won conference championships last week. I was at one of those games. Carmichael's played Fort Cherry, with the winner winning the Tri-County South Conference title. Carmichael's wins 16-7. They slopped their way to the win. It was in rain, a driving rain that didn't let up the entire game. The field was something that looked like brown soup by the end of the game. But Carmichael's was really impressive in that game, Joe. There was a 31-minute stretch where Carmichael's offensive and defensive lines just dominated the game. During that 31 minutes, Carmichael's outgained Fort Cherry 224 yards to 2.
Yeah, and for those of you old enough, you remember the commercial, Cudsma fixed the weather. That was a benefit to Carmichael's, because when you have a stronger team, a stronger line, bigger people up front, you don't mind that the conditions are muddy and soggy. And I think that really hurt Fort Cherry.
Well, yeah, the weather played to Carmichael's advantage, because Carmichael's has a big offensive line, and they have an offense that is running north and south, straight ahead. Fort Cherry uses, they depend on big plays. They use a lot of zone read type stuff with quarterback Ryan Culberson, where they run east and west a lot, and that did not work on Friday night. It was tough to get to the corner, get to the boundary. So running straight ahead like Carmichael's did really played to their advantage.
And if you think back to the days of Brian Davis at Wash High, when Burgettstown beat them in Burgettstown, I believe it was his junior year, it might have been his senior year, I can't remember. But it was the same situation. The field was wet, and cutting was hard to do, and I think that really had an effect on the game. And the same thing happened with Fort Cherry and Carmichael's.
Now, Burgettstown did play Washington last week, and Washington was one of those 3 local teams that won conference titles. Wash High rolls this time 41-6 over the Blue Devils at Wash High Stadium. Isaiah Robinson had a huge game. Listen to this, Joe. 4 carries, 200 yards, and a touchdown. How would you like to have a guy that averages 45 yards a carry and his average goes down? And
that was just in the first half.
Robinson also 2 catches, 73 yards, and a touchdown in that game.
Yeah, he from a wide receiver position, which is very unusual. Usually you get those kind of touches and that kind of yardage from running backs. And I talked to Mike Bosnick about it, and he said he's seen DeQuay Isbell and Shai McKenzie have similar types of efforts in their careers, but they were both in the backfield, and Robinson, a wide receiver, very odd, but they run those jet sweeps and they get the ball to a lot of different people, and that allowed him to have the kind of game that he has.
The other team that won a conference title last week was South Fayette. The Lions win the Northwest 9 conference title. They win 48-14 at Highlands. Quarterback Drew Saxton, 404 passing yards and 4 touchdowns for the Lions. 46 consecutive regular season wins. We should note that Wash High has won 28 in a row. That's a couple of impressive
going for their
streaks.
29th against Beth-Center this weekend. And they've won the conference championship 3 years in a row, and they won the last 2 games of the regular season the previous season.
Both South Fayette and Wash High in the playoffs. Another team that's in the playoffs is Ringgold. The Rams finished the season against Trinity right here at Joe Montana Stadium on Friday night, and Joe Tuscano had a chance to catch up with Nick Milchovich, the Rams head coach.
Okay, this is Joe Toscano. I'm with Nick Milkovich, the head football coach at Ringgold High School. And Nick, this has been a pretty interesting season. You're playoff bound once again, and I was wondering if you could just tell me a little bit about the beginning of the season, what the expectations were, and what's gone right, what hasn't gone so right, and where you're standing now.
Well, I think at the beginning of the year there were high expectations. Coming into the season, I think we were young defensively. We lost a lot of good defensive players from last year, and it took time. It just had a lot of teaching, a lot of repetition that needed to take place. We played a few good football teams early in the year, and I don't think we were ready to play them yet from a defensive standpoint. But we're getting better defensively. One week at a time, we're starting to get there, and the offense has really taken off. So we've gotten better with age.
Who in particular has been kind of a surprise on defense, or if you have more than one person that's kind of caught your eye and played better than maybe you might have thought at the beginning of the year?
Well, one guy that's played very well for us defensively is Dalton Holt. He's he's the straw that stirs the drink on defense. We have him at free safety. We move him up in the box. He's a great tackler. I think he's a scholarship football player. And he's really emerged as a leader here as the season has progressed. Also at outside linebacker, one of our seniors, Easton Fine. He's done a great job and has been a very, very steady player for us for the better part of 3 years, both as a receiver and a running back. As a receiver and as a linebacker. And up front, Isaac Petrosky, Justin Mayer, and Gage Ivory, 3 of our senior linemen, have really managed to kind of hold their ground and be stout, and they're getting better every week as well.
And this season, you had probably one of the most incredible comebacks maybe in the history of high school football. You scored 2 touchdowns in the final 8 seconds to beat West Mifflin. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of effect that had emotionally on the team, because it looked like things were not going to go well, and then all of a sudden, you come away with a victory?
Yeah, sure. They scored. There was 1 minute and 3 seconds left when they scored, and we were down 12 points. And, I think Coach Barbaro, our offensive coordinator, told the kids in the huddle, if we're going to go down, let's go down swinging, So the kids didn't give up. We just, we ended up, I think we threw, 7 straight completions. We were able to sneak the ball in, and, we had some fortunate penalties. We got an onside kick. If we played that game 100 times, we probably wouldn't win it once. And, that's why you play 48 minutes and not 47. And honestly, it's an instructional video on why you never quit. And it's just been a huge lift for us, as we move forward throughout the year.
And I have a bone to pick with you. You beat my alma mater, Newcastle, last week. I just don't know. But how much did that win over West Mifflin, propel yourself into that game? And did you feel that there was a little bit of more electricity with this team?
Oh,
after
absolutely. We've been a different team now for a few weeks, I think. We had a little rough patch there in the middle of the year, and we've played good football after that. We played TJ here, and they got us, but we were able to stay with them for about 3 quarters, and then after that, we've just been playing some winning football. The Newcastle game, it's great to be up at Taggart Stadium. I'm kind of a historian with those old school places, and it was exciting for me to go up there. And it was even better for us to go up there, play well, and get a win, because they have a good team with some really talented players.
George Martin has just been having an outstanding year for you, and the line seems to be blocking real well. Has there been anybody on that line that has just blossomed into a heck of a player for you this year?
Well, you know what? Our line right now, we have 4 seniors, starting, and all 4 of them have experience. They're multiple year starters, so we expect a lot out of them. Coming from Gage Ivory at tackle, Isaac Petrosky at guard, Justin Mayer at guard, and Zach Giovanello at center. And then we've made a switch on our line, and we have a junior at our other tackle, Braden Pusel, who's really come on here in the past 2 weeks and solidified our line. And we made some adjustments with our pass protection too. That's really helped us, and we've kind of simplified things for them. And they've done a great job. George has been sensational. He's a senior. He's emerged as a leader. He's really grown a lot this year in all aspects of the game. And he can make all the throws. And I think whatever college picks up on him is going to get a really good player.
Now you got a game, a rivalry game, I would suspect, with Trinity. Doesn't have the exact same meaning since Trinity lost to Greensburg-Salem last week, but I'm sure it's not going to take much of the shine off with your kids. I'm sure they want to beat them just as much as Trinity wants to beat you.
Right. You know, we're taking the approach that it's a first-round playoff game. You know, this is the first round of the playoffs. We've got to win, and you know, we don't know what to expect. You know, a lot of times when teams aren't in the playoffs, you know, things can go one way or the other. So we can't predict, you know, who's going to show up. So we're going to be ready because Trinity's a dangerous team. They got a lot of size, and the tailback's a really good player. The quarterback can make throws, and you know, Coach Miller's a heck of a coach. So you know, we're going to have our work cut out for us.
Well, listen, I want to thank you, Nick, for being down here. They're going to be playing, Ringgold is going to be playing Trinity this Friday, and you got to be here. Shame on you for 7 weeks. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
I'd also like to thank Nick Milchovich for spending some time with us and sharing his thoughts on the Rams season. Joe, an interesting thing here, there's 8 teams that make the playoffs in 4A, which Ringgold is part of. Ringgold could have 2 wins over playoff teams that could be seated higher than Ringgold.
Well, is the WPIL going to actually seed it, or are they going to slot it? There's a difference.
Yeah, if Ringgold is 4th in the Big 9 conference, they might come out as number 7 or 8, probably number 7 in the seedings if they just match up the 2 conferences. Or they could seed it and play teams within their own conference in the first round. That would be interesting.
And this won't be the first time that this happens, and it's going to be a question that they're going to have to address, you know, pretty quickly here and for future seasons, because there's not a lot of teams, and if one conference is better than another or stronger than another, if you're actually going to seed the process and you're going to make it fair,
then teams playing in conference.
Yeah, then that's what's going to have to happen.
Now, we told you the only team. We told you that there's one team that will have its fate in its own hands, basically. Win and you're in. It's the only situation facing one team, and that is West Greene in the Tri-County South. Pioneers can grab the 5th and final playoff spot out of the Tri-County South if the Pioneers beat California at home at Kennedy Field on Friday night. Joe, you're going to be at that game. I don't know if you know that yet, but that's where you're going to be.
My wife's alma mater, and they're trying to snap a streak since 1993 of not making the playoffs. West Greene, that is, and you know, they're going to be depending on Zach Pettit, and they're going to need their best game in the last week of the season to get in, or you know, it'll go another year that they'll have to wait.
Yeah, California already in the playoffs, the 3rd place team in the Tri-County South. They're trying to improve playoff seeding, so they have something to play for. Now, if West Greene loses to California, Avella looks like it's going to get the final playoff spot. And yes, Avella has 2 wins right now, but one of those wins was over West Greene, 32-20 in the 2nd week of the season. Both West Greene and Avella would end up with 2 wins in the Tri-County South, give the tiebreaker to Avella if Jefferson Morgan loses to Fort Cherry.
Yes.
Jefferson Morgan has 1 win on the season.
And it's not against Fort Cherry.
Well, Jefferson Morgan has 1 win on the season. They're 1-5 in the conference, 1-8 overall, but they can still make the playoffs if they upset Fort Cherry at Fort Cherry. They need that win, and also get wins by California and Mapletown over Monessen.
Yeah, and I'm not good for Jefferson if that happens, if they can do that and get into the playoffs, and good for Avella, but you know where the destination is for those teams. One of them's going
to Clareton or Jeanette.
Clareton or Jeanette, maybe both.
One thing I want to point out, only one team in the Tri-County South is eliminated from playoff contention. That team is Monessen. Who would have thought before the season that the first team eliminated from the Tri-County South would be Monessen?
I certainly didn't, and you know, they've just had a really struggling year, and JoJo Salvino took over as football coach, and is also the boys basketball coach at the high school. And I'm not sure what's given him more gray hairs, the football team or the basketball team.
I can tell you which one wins more.
Yeah.
One other thing I want to point out, this week we have a couple of games that do have a little bit of playoff scenarios to them. Short-Tears Houston plays a game at Fraser. If Short-Tears Houston wins, they will finish second in the conference. If Fraser wins, Fraser is the second place team. Now, Short-Tears Houston will have a home game in the first round of the playoffs. Even if they finish third, they'll win the tiebreaker contest to get a home game in the first round of the playoffs.
And they'll be hard to beat at home.
I also wanted to give a shout out to Cannon McMillan. The Big Macs pulled an upset of sorts, winning 13-10 at Peters Township in the rain last Friday night. If Cannon McMillan defeats Butler Friday night, Cannon McMillan will finish 5-5. That's the first time since 2008 that the Big Macs will have a non-losing season.
Yeah, and my shout out, or maybe just an update, Dylan Rush from Mapletown. He has 1,632 yards. He's been struggling with the sprained ankle. He needs 268 yards, if my math is correct, 368 yards in the last game, and they were 1 week in the playoffs to reach 2,000 yards in this season.
And Mapletown will be hosting Monessen in the regular season finale. Mapletown already has a playoff spot wrapped up. That does it for this week. Until next week, enjoy the games.